information with history, the ships of Chittim are those tribes of the north when they were coming to attack Rome. Okay? And they said, shall come against him. That means he's coming against Rome. Therefore, he shall be grieved. Why? Because eventually those Vandals took over Rome and defeat the Caesar. He grieved and returned and shall have indignation against the Holy Covenant. That's the time when there was tremendous persecution by the Caesars to the Christians of those times. And this is the time when one of the Caesars called Constantine, Constantine is a very nice story when you read about him. Constantine was the first Caesar who became Christian. But many people question his conversion because he became associated with whom? With the ones who they said to be Christians, right? So, and then, look at what he said here, and return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. Here we have another Caesar that is called Justinian. Justinian the Great, that's how you pronounce. And what he did, he made an alliance with Rome. He transferred, because at that time, the Caesar was the main authority, military, religious, and everything. The Caesars, they were considered God. But because they were overwhelmed by those attacks, he made an arrangement with whom? With the Roman bishop. And he said, look, I am going to transfer you to be the head of the churches. That's the beginning of Catholicism. That's when papal Rome started. There was even a decree that it was given by him. These things happened in 533 approximately. And then Rome started using the army of the Romans to start persecuting those tribes who they were attacking them. And the main issue was because the Catholicism at that time, it was talking about Trinity, nature of Jesus. And those tribes, they did not believe in those things. Many of the tribes, they surrendered to the papacy, agreeing with what he said, but there was 3 of them who they didn't want it. Remember who were they? Just as a mnemotechnic, remember, like at the channel HBO. But the H for Heruli, the B for the Visigoths, and the O is for the Ostrogoths. You see? And the last tribe, after Rome, he needs to be making alliances. He start, here he said, and with them that forsake the Holy Covenant, because really, the Roman Catholic at that time, it was not a faithful church. So it was people who professed to have Christianity, but who they have making alliance with the Roman militaries so they can both have power. And this is what happened. So now you can see how verse 30 marks the beginning of papal Rome. Is that right? If we stay with those verses, we kind of broken down in the main parts of Daniel 11. But let's study a little bit more. So here you can see in the graphic, Babylon is here, and Egypt is here. This is the king of the north, this is the king of the south. So people sometimes ask, why? What happened with the people in the rest of the world? Who was looking at Jesus and God at that time? And who is he looking at right now? He's always looking to his people. At that time, who was his people? Israel, right? That's what happened. 300 before Jesus Christ. That's what his people. Then we go to Daniel 11:20. 11:20 is another verse that we can link it in the Bible. Here said, then shall stand up in his place as a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger, not in battle. Who do you think is talking about? For that one, we need to go to Luke. Let's go to the book of Luke. Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, verse 1. Let's see. And it came to pass in those days that went out a decree from whom? Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be what? Be taxed. Here you have. Who is in Daniel 11:20? Caesar Augustus. In the glory of the kingdom. He was considered for some people the first Caesar, and he brought a lot of peace to Rome. Not only he brought peace, but he brought a lot of prosperity for almost 40 years. That's what this, when you study, you open anytime Caesar Augustus, and you will find good things about him. That he did prosperity-wise for Rome. That's what they said, the glory of the kingdom, because those were probably the best years of Rome. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle, because he died of old age. You see? Most of the people, warriors, soldiers, how usually they die? Either they die in battle, or either somebody kill him right there in his kingdom. That's a lot of those things going on in those times. So, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. That's what we read in Luke chapter 2, verse 1. So, and remember the same sequence: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. We are in verse 20. And in verse 7, then Daniel 11:20 introduced the pagan Roman Empire. Before that, in chapter 14, when we study the robbers of thy people, that marks the beginning of the Romans. They were a little group of people they were looking to have power, to have land, and they keep growing and growing to the point in 1120 when they become the Roman Empire. So then let's go and read the next chapter, because let's see, in verse 21, look at what it said here. And in his estate shall stand up what? Vile person. Who is this vile person? If you go to Luke, we read chapter 2, right? If you read Luke chapter 3, that's the next Caesar. Who is talking about? Which name is brought in there in Luke chapter 3? Tiberius Caesar. Is that right? So, who is the vile person? Tiberius Caesar. Are you following how? Right? Start making sense. So in verse 14, we find the robbers of thy people. And in verse 16, we see about this battle that there is, the kings of the south with the king of the north. So that's something going on for a while. If you look in verse 17, if you want to put a name on that one, because that's talking about whom? Julius Caesar. And then in verse 17 is introduced another person. The person that is introduced here is, when Egypt was falling down, the last king, one of the Ptolemies, he had a son and a daughter. Of course, the son was called Ptolemy, but with another second name after that. But the daughter, you know who was? Cleopatra. And that's where Julius Caesar started the interaction with it. Because the father died, they need to find a representative to take care of them. And guess who they chose? A Roman authority. But then this person was killed by the son. And that's when Julius Caesar started going in there. Right? It's a lot of history here. Well, eventually in verse 19, Julius Caesar died what? He was assassinated. He was killed. That's what when you read the verse said, then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. He was killed. He was assassinated. And this is the story of these kingdoms. Just few people make them all. So now we see, who is this raiser of taxes? Augustus Caesar. He was started being an emperor in 27 BC, and he died at 14 AD when he was 76 years old. And you said, why God brings this name here? Because what? This is the time in Daniel 11:20 when Jesus was born. There is no way to forget. Something is important. Same thing like Xerxes was highlighted, is because he wants to bring our mind to remember when the decree to release the Jewish people was given. Here, just to remember when Jesus was born, because he died at 14 after Christ, so Jesus was already born there. Then, we know this vile person who it is? Tiberius Caesar. But here said something. He seized the kingdom by intrigue. It's interesting because Tiberius Caesar was not the son of Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar had a wife and something happened. He remarried again, and this woman had already a son. And that son was Tiberius Caesar. So he was not his blood son. And when he grew up, I guess he didn't grow up with a good character. When he was old enough to be a king, his wife was begging Augustus, hey, make him the king, make him the king, make him the king. But he said, no, he doesn't fit for the office. As a matter of fact, there was 3 people ahead of him that they thought to be the next Caesar. But something happened. Those 3 people ahead of him, one by one, started dying. One of them was Agrippa, a well-known name in history. He died. The first one died, the second died, the third died. Who was the fourth one? Tiberius Caesar. That's what the word, and seized the kingdom by, curious, 3 of them died before, raise a lot of suspicions, right? And the thing is this, when he died, they kill him. They kill him. They suffocate him with pillows. That's what he said about him. That's where you will find interesting things. So, but then we come to 22. Remember, Daniel has 45 verses. 22 is mentioned who here? The Prince of the Covenant. Something happened. Who is that? Jesus Christ. If we go to Luke chapter 3, okay, something important happened here. And I believe that's why this name is kept in the Bible, Tiberius Caesar, in verse 21. Because if you look at in Luke chapter 3, we read already verse 1. Now in the 15th year of the reign of whom? Tiberius Caesar. Okay, remember. And he gives you here the 15th year. So it's very specific, right? So when you follow history, you can know what is associated with him, with this specific year. Go to verse 21. And Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, okay, which was the son of Heti. That's when he became his minister. I'm sorry, I was reading verse 23. Verse 21 said, now when all the people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also being baptized. So this is when Jesus was baptized. Okay? In the 15th year. And do you remember when we studied Daniel chapter 9, we reached, Daniel was overwhelmed by chapter 8 when it was revealed the prophecy of the 2300 days, right? In chapter 9, the angel revealed something, the 70 weeks, right? And in one of those, this is 70 weeks are for your people. Remember what happened in the year 27 AD? That's when Jesus Christ was baptized. 31 AD, Jesus was crucified, the middle of the week, 3.5 years. 3.5 years later, Stephen was stoned, 34 AD. So, Tiberius Caesar started co-governing with Augustus Caesar around 1213. If you added 15 years to that, what year you will get to? 27. Exactly what the prophecy of Daniel in chapter 9 is explained in detail. So everything matched perfectly. And remember, Daniel was written almost 600 years before Jesus was born. So this is the Prince of the Covenant, who a week later, 3.5 years, middle of the week, he was crucified. Well, then we keep moving to the next verses, and still you will find King of the North, King of the South. You just remember, whoever is in the area of Syria, Babylon, that's the King of the North. Whoever is around Egypt is the King of the South, right? Now you cannot forget that part. Here it said, but this king's heart shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So here he's talking about Augustus now is the king of the north. Why is that Augustus is king of the north now? Because he already has conquered Syria, the last remnants of the Alexandria government. So now, what used to be Antiochus now is what? The Caesars from Rome. And who is the king of the south in this verse? Is Mark Antony. Mark Antony, it happens to be his brother-in-law, I believe, from Augustus. But what happened? This is what is interesting. You said, how come two Romans are fighting? Well, remember about Cleopatra, right? She was left under care of one of the Romans authorities. Well, this Roman authority eventually was killed. Then Julius Caesar started, but then Julius Caesar also died. Well, Mark Antony started going to Egypt. And guess what? He fell in love with Cleopatra. And his brother-in-law, do you think he was happy with it? He was married to his sister, right? And Mark Antony, he started taking over the business of Egypt. Without realizing, he's fighting against Augustus. Because they both want power. One following Cleopatra, pushings and whatever happens in there. But that's how he became the king of the south, because he was fighting for Egypt. He wanted Cleopatra to be dominating those areas. And then, verse 31. Remember what we said in verse 30? In verse 30 we said, that's the beginning of the papacy, right? And that's around 530, where Justinian gives them the power to the Bishop of Rome to become the Pope. But still they were fighting those tribes. And forces shall be mastered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily. This is important for us to know. We said, why is important that? Because when you study in the book of Matthew 24, Jesus spoke about Daniel. Remember? Let's go and read it, because this is important. Let's go and read what Jesus said about it. Everything that Jesus said is very important, right? And if he said it for a reason, look at what he said. Matthew 24, verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whose readeth, let him understand. Because he said, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So it's important or no, it's not important, this aspect? And here you see which word here? Abomination of desolation. Forces shall be mastered by him, and they shall defy the sanctuary fortress. Then shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there abomination of desolation. Easy to understand? No, it's not easy to understand. So here, what happened? Him is the papacy. Okay? That's the king of the north, because by verses before, that's what it means. Forces is like a forces will be given to him. And this is the year when Rome was trying to say, how can I get rid of these tribes who are harassing us here and attacking us and don't allow me to take the power of this whole Rome? That's when one of the tribes from the Franks, okay, there was a king. Did I put the name here? I didn't put it here, right here. The army of the Franks, the king at that time was Clovis. Clovis, a few years before 500 AD, he became Christian. He was one of those barbarian tribes. And he said, he was the first one, and said to the Pope, my army is on your service. And he started fighting for the Pope and start getting rid of all those three tribes who they need to get rid of it. And eventually it was accomplished. 538, the last tribe, the Ostrogoths, they disappeared. They were taken away. So what they were doing before, here, if you read in your Bible, the only word that is there, what? Is daily. Sacrifices is a word that is being added. Because whoever translated, they thought that that's talking about sacrifices in the sanctuary, right? Other people, they said, well, this is talking maybe about some sort of and I believe that's what it is. At this time, there was a defile in the sanctuary fortress, means what was the predominance? If you see Rome plagued with barbarian tribes who don't believe in God, what do you see really there? All what you see there is what? Is paganism, pagan customs. These daily pagan customs was all over. When the Pope, with the help of the army, got rid of those three tribes, all these pagan customs start to, in their minds, is going to be resolved. But who came to replace after the pagans, these barbarian tribes were taken out? And placed there the who? The abomination of desolation. That's when it starts. Abomination is because when somebody, if I said I'm an atheist, people know if I have a crazy life, people said, well, he's not a Christian, don't believe in God, right? But if somebody is a Christian and start doing terrible things, how do you think he's looking to the eyes of God? As an abomination. This is when the papacy took over the control of the world. They start raising as a power So when you see the daily, is the pagan customs and practices. When you see and place there the abomination of desolation, he's talking about the papacy. Because the papacy, it was this apostate Christianity who little by little, he thought or he presented to the world that he's getting rid of everything that is pagan. But eventually, little by little, start incorporating pagan customs under the name of God. Don't you find there as an abominable things, those ones? And Jesus said, when you see him in the holy place, we will get to that point. But so here we remember, we study in verse 29, that's when pagan Rome finished, when they moved to Constantinople. In verse 30, we saw that Justinian declares the Rome bishop head of the church. That's the beginning of papal Rome. And here you see when they got rid of all the three barbarian tribes, the Herulites, the Visigoths, and the Ostrogoths. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. Who is talking here? Who start exalting himself? The papacy, right? The papacy. Shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. What type of blasphemies we know that in the Bible is talking about? Jesus was forgiving the sins of a man who was brought to him. And the Jewish, they tried to stone him. Because he said, why are you stoning me? Because the only one who can forgive sins is who? God. Who is the power right now who is forgiving sins through a human? Who is the power that said that can forgive sins, not through Jesus, but through a man? The papacy, right? The other time when Jesus was tried to be stoned, accused of blasphemy, is when he said that he is God, right? And the Jews said also, we are trying to stone you because you, being a man, pretend to be God. You find it, Mark chapter 2, John chapter 10, you can read it there. If a man said, I am God, is that a blasphemy? It was a blasphemy for Jesus to say that he's God? No. For Jesus, no. But the power right now existing, what is said now? He said, I am the representative of God here. I am the voice of God. I am infallible. Whatever I said, that's what it needs to be. Is that right? So now you can see who's this abomination. But this is what happened. This little horn, the papacy, start growing and growing and growing. 2 Thessalonians 2:3, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. The only time when you use the son of perdition in the Bible is referring to whom? To Judas. So if you look in the Bible, I'll give you the verse later on, that's referring to Judas. So Judas was among the people following Jesus. It was. And you know, the little horn, the man of sin, the son of perdition has another name. What's the other name? The Antichrist. Okay? Some people call him the beast also. And as you can see, son of perdition used for Judas can be a person who does not profess Christianity to fit those features. No, it needs to be somebody who professes to follow Jesus. That's what it needs to be, a Christian power. That little horn, that man of sin, that son of perdition, the Antichrist, the beast, it needs to be a Christian power. And we know that because in the verse before, we call the abomination of desolation and the blasphemies. Okay, so this is what happened here. Oops, sorry. Let's go and see. Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. You see? Exalt himself above all that is called God. Those barbarian tribes, they believe a little bit about God. But this, the papacy needs to get rid of them, so that he sits as God in the temple of God. So, and he said, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. That was 2 Thessalonians, New Testament. So he was referring, this is already working. He's talking about what Daniel is going through in this vision. So then, counterfeit worship start flowing from Rome. Everything is a counterfeit. And this is in verse 32. We will dedicate a couple of minutes because the last part is probably the most important because that's for our times. But let's finish this part. Those who do wickedly against the covenant of shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Here what happened. There is going to be some corruption, but there is going to be some people that start getting strong. What happened in 538? The papacy took over right after the last tribe of the Ostrogoths were uprooted from Rome, right? So then, do you remember the 1,260 days that we study in Daniel chapter 7? So that's when it started. 538, as we read before, this power start growing, start having dominion. And they said, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. This is the 1260 years that the papacy was taking control and imposing by force their beliefs. And this is the 1,260 days that you will find in Daniel and in Revelation. Remember we read about Babylon, the great mystery? If you read a few verses after, you will find he had this power, this entity had power for times and a half. That's another meaning for 1,260 days. This is the time when there was grave persecution. This is the time when there was, let's go and read a few verses because we need to get this point here. Let's see, we might have maybe 3 minutes because we need to leave this thing ready for the next part. The next part is going to be something that needs to be studied together. Let's go and read it, a few verses here. So this is, remember what things happened here. This is the times when there was great persecution. If you had a Bible, if you were sharing with others the Bible, you were just destroyed. This is the time when start